It's Monday, March 23rd, 2022. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with another installment of the Two-Party Georgia Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia. I'm here today in Austin, Texas with Richard McBride, a native of Brunswick, Georgia, and former United States Army captain. Richard is a proud graduate of Georgia Southern University. He is the former executive director of the Georgia Republican Party, serving under Chairman Bob Shaw and Mac Mattingly. He was also a former regional director with the Republican National Committee. Richard, thank you very much for hosting us here in Austin and taking some time out of this rainy Monday morning to...
You're most welcome. Glad to have you in Texas.
Talk some history and politics in Texas. So tell us a little bit about your childhood, your upbringing. Where'd you grow up in Georgia?
I grew up, born in Brunswick, Georgia. My dad was in construction, so we moved around a little bit, but mainly Brunswick, Georgia, St. Simon's. Went to school there, graduated from Glenn Academy, and then on to Georgia Southern, and had plans to be at the University of Georgia, but the government needed me a little more in the United States Army in Vietnam, I guess. So that's kind of where we sidelined and went that way.
Right.
I got involved with the political aspect when I was at Southern in '64 for Barry Goldwater. And the Goldwater movement was big, and got involved in the Young Republicans in there. Went on to become a regional director of Young Republicans. Unfortunately, didn't get to serve that term out because it was I went into the Army after graduation. But real active in Young Republicans then and trying to help get elected Republicans. Goldwater kind of broke the mold finally in Georgia from the Democrat Party by virtue of carrying the state. We actually did elect some people in the House and in the Senate there, but it was a tough mold all the way up, I think, until the '70s. To get on the ballot in Georgia, we were like a foreign entity. You had to have so many signatures or whatever.
Right.
So I was active then, and then I went into the Army. And when I came out of the Army, obviously looking for a job or whatever, some friends that I had met during my time in Young Republicans said that there's this guy named Fletcher Thompson's going to run for the Senate. You know a lot of the people on that group. Would you consider working as like a field man in South Georgia? And I said, sure, I got nothing else to do right now. I'm just out of the Army. Life is good. So I took that job, and we carried all of my area. Unfortunately, Fletcher didn't carry the areas of his district up there in Atlanta area, but we carried all our area and came probably the most votes in any Republican statewide at the time.
Oh, yeah.
40-something, 49%, something like that. Sam Nunn beat us. So from there, I went to the state party. Bob Shaw, them had offered, they were looking at doing a field program, organizing and keep building. And Shaw's deal was we need to build from the ground up, not from the top down. In other words, we ran people all the time, house suits or whoever would be running, but we didn't have anybody running at the courthouse level. We didn't have anybody running for state house or something. So that was kind of to get something organized down on the local level. So that was where we started planning doing that. I took a sabbatical in '74 to manage Quincy Collins' campaign in Cobb County, and we lost that in a recount by 500, I think, and 42 votes, if I remember correctly.
Larry McDonald.
Larry McDonald. And we lost that, and it was, if you remember, that was right in the midst of Watergate, and we were probably one of the most successful campaigns in the South at that time during Watergate when everybody else was getting wiped out. As a result, got a little attention in the national, and then I got an opportunity to go to the Republican National Committee after we lost the White House in '76. And Bill Brock was coming in as chairman. And so I went into there as the regional political director for basically the South. And at that time, there was no congressional committee, senatorial committee, governor's committee. all of it was under ours. So when I would come to a state to visit, I would visit with the governor candidate, the Senate candidate, and the congressional candidates, and determine whether we should give them money or not money, or how their campaigns were going. So it was a great opportunity. It was a great deal. And at one time, like I say, I had Texas all the way to Florida, and that just became too much. They
I can't imagine why.
they said, would you give up Florida and move to Texas? And so I had just gotten married, and my wife was actually a native Texan, although she was raised in Georgia. So we moved to Texas, to Austin, Texas. Actually moved up to Round Rock, which is right north of here, for about 10 years, and moved back into Austin. But we moved to Austin, and I came here specifically to help John Tower, and we had an opportunity, we thought, to elect a governor under Bill Clements. We thought Clements would be kind of the long shot, and Tower, we'd get Tower in. It kind of worked out the other way. Tower had a really tough race, and Clements actually won pretty big.
Right.
So that was the kind of the start of, and I thought I would be here in Texas maybe 2 years and head back to Georgia. But after that, and they asked to stay on for the campaign 80 with Reagan.
And here we are 45 years later.
And here we are 45 years later, I'm still here. After the Reagan campaign, et cetera, then Phil Graham, Lee Atwater called me one day as an old friend from South Carolina, and Lee called and said, I got a guy I want you to meet. You're gonna like him, come up here. So they flew me up to Washington. I met with a guy named Phil Graham. Said he's gonna switch parties, but he's not just gonna switch parties, he's gonna resign his seat and run as a Republican, because he said the people elected him as a Democrat, which is very true, very smart. So anyway, after that, he ran for the Senate. I became his campaign manager for the U.S. Senate in '84. And after that, I wound up doing a governor's race and congressional races. Then I got into doing grassroots campaigns and grassroots stuff. And then Graham became chairman of the Senate committee and asked me to go and review different campaigns in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Arizona, et cetera. During that time, I got to be good friends with John McCain out in Arizona, because he was wanting to run for Congress at the time when I was out there. They moved my states for a while. I had some all the way to the western states. I had Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado for a brief period of time, and Arkansas. So I moved my states more to the west than the south, because we'd hired some other people. But anyway, that's kind of where I was and where we are. And then I was kind of worn out on campaigns, but the last campaign was here in Texas, was for the lieutenant governor's race. And lieutenant governor here in Texas is a very powerful figure. In fact, probably more powerful than the governor, because as the head of the Senate, he decides all Senate committees, he decides all chairmen of those committees, and he decides basically all the bills that come before the Senate. So
sounds like Georgia's lieutenant governor.
Big, powerful position. Well, anyway, we ran the lieutenant governor's race and won, and I went into state government for the first. Actually, let me retract. He was the General Land Office commissioner first, and I went to the General Land Office with him as his PR person, I guess you would say, the press secretary or whatever, PR type person, political person, and worked in state government there with him, with the land office, because there's a lot of things he wanted to do in the land office, and so we started doing that. It also tied in with Veterans Affairs, which I was a veteran, so it worked out real good at the land office.
What year would that have been?
That was in 2000. I think it was around 2000.
Okay, so
prior to that, I was doing some direct mail and stuff for different companies and corporations like Enron and others. So we were doing some grassroots stuff for power companies and stuff. because they were changing the stuff in the legislature. So I'd moved more towards state government at that time, and then wound up with, like I say, because a lot of my friends were doing this campaign, and please come on board, so I did. Went to the land office with him, and then went to the lieutenant governor's office when he got elected lieutenant governor.
Was that Rick Perry or?
No, that was David Dewhurst.
Dewhurst. Oh, okay.
Dewhurst.
Okay.
So Dewhurst we went to the lieutenant governor's office, and I stayed there for till 2005, and then I decided that I would go into lobbying. A lot of my friends said you should go into you know a lot of people here, so so I went into lobbying, and I lobbied for the next 15, 17 years, I guess, something like that. 15 years. I retired a few years ago. And that's kind of brings us up to where we are now.
Okay. Well, now what I'm going to do is we're going to go back, and I'm going to ask you some questions in detail about, for example, what was it about Barry Goldwater that attracted you to politics? You already mentioned that Georgia is a very democratic state. What was it about Barry Goldwater and maybe his brand of republicanism that
I think it was
you
a brand of
with?
conservatism.
Okay.
Less government, better government. Whereas with Johnson and the Democrats, I kept seeing more and more of government's the answer, not the problem. And I realized I believed in those early years, and still believe that government can be the problem. It also could be the solution, but it can be the problem. And at that time, if you remember, if you go back and look at it, I think Kennedy was more conservative at the time. If you look at a lot of his policies, he was very conservative. We had a lot of conservative Democrats that later became conservative Republicans in the South. It became easier in a lot of cases to switch parties than to try to beat them in primaries or in elections. So they actually started coming over. So that's what appealed to me at Goldwater, was that his philosophy, his beliefs at the time were very conservative, and I just felt the same way. And in all honesty, a lot of the Democrats that we elected back then, and they felt the same way. I mean, I think a lot of them voted for. Well, a lot of them apparently voted for Goldwater because he carried the state.
Clearly, many of them
so
did.
they had to be a lot of Democrats liking for him. So that was kind of the start.
Okay. Now, is that when you met Mac? Was 64, or was that later on?
I met Mac the first time when Mac ran for Congress.
So 66, when he ran for.
Yeah.
He ran against.
I'd known
Bill
Mac.
Stuckey.
I'd seen him off and on that, But
Oh, sure.
but yeah, he's on the island. I mean, you knew Mac. He was an IBM typewriter salesman.
Always be selling.
White shirt, blue tie, whatever it was. But yeah, no, that's and one of my best friends there in Brunswick worked for Mac for the Congress deal.
Okay.
The congressional race.
So in 64, Goldwater carries the state, surprises a lot of people. Bo Calloway gets elected to Congress.
Big with Bo.
So tell me about, were you involved in his gubernatorial campaign in 66?
Only in the sense that we were youth.
Sure.
Now, some of my best friends, this is what's really funny.
Yeah.
Some of my best friends that were Calloway's key guys, that was the ones that were with Fletcher Thompson in 72.
Okay, so it'd be like Bill
Buddy
Amos.
Bishop.
Buddy Bishop.
Mike Swinehart. Buddy became one of my closest friends. We have actually roomed together in Atlanta for a while. And then Buddy became the national director of the Republican National Committee. He promoted.
That's right.
He pushed me for that. He was the media guru for the committee. And Buddy was a lifelong, really lifelong friend. I was at Paul Beardy's funeral. He was a lifelong friend. And he put a group of us together, Bruce Hildebrand and the whole group of us that later came in 72. But back then, that's who I knew. I knew these different guys. Bill Amos, all these guys became friends. And then, of course, you disappear for 4 years, with 3 or 4 years for the service, and then you come back. And all of these, a couple of them had gotten into Congress, and some of them were, Fletcher had gone to Congress, and all these people that you knew in the Young Republicans are now holding office somewhere doing something.
Right.
So it was really exciting from that standpoint that we'd at least made some ground
Right.
in the party.
What do you think it would have meant for the Georgia Republican Party if Bo Calloway had been able to squeeze out just a few more votes and actually become governor in 1966?
Well, I think it would have changed the whole scenario. I think he would have. I think Bo Calloway won, period. But it was a sad day, and when George Smith decided to put Lester Maddox in there. But the point was that if that had happened, then I think you would have seen a lot of conservative Democrats switch parties. Mm-hmm. I don't think we would have had to go fight the elections in a lot of cases. I think they would have had more of a crossing over. I think that would have started the tide. It's ironic if you think about it. The first Republican elected statewide since Reconstruction, I think, was in 1960 here in the state of Texas, John Tower. Mm-hmm. It was almost 20 years to the date before we had elected a statewide Republican through the South. Mm-hmm. And the last one was the Mattingly and Paula Hawkins and those coming in. We had not elected in Georgia statewide ever. So it was 20 years.
Yep.
I think if Callaway had gotten that election, it wouldn't have been 20 years.
So you think Georgia, the development of the Republican Party would have looked more like Texas and some of those other states?
I think so. I think it would have started changing. And I don't think there's any doubt about it would have changed.
Well, it's interesting you talk about party switchers and stuff because that's what we saw in Georgia when Sonny Perdue became governor.
Right.
The Republicans took the Senate, not through elections, but through 3 or 4 party switchers who saw which way the wind was blowing.
And that's what happened in Texas. Mm-hmm. Look at Texas. Texas has changed. We've been in control over here now for 27 years, 28 years going on. There's not been one. When Ann Richards got elected, everybody talks about it, I thought it was the greatest thing that ever happened to the Republican Party in Texas because they haven't elected a statewide person since she was in office.
Wow. And that's
not one statewide. And they had
96.
They had all the control all the way down. And we took over the Supreme Court. We took over, there's 26 constitutional offices in Texas, and we elected all of them. And they have not elected anybody since that time.
Well, I mean, this is skipping ahead a bit.
Yeah, sure.
But you see what happened in Georgia, for example, in 2018, 2020. And the argument is that demographic change is sort of driving political change.
Right.
Do you think that's something in Texas that Republicans, from your perspective, need to be mindful of? Is that the state's changing?
I think they're mindful of it. I think they are. And I think the question is, if you're coming here, don't bring your California politics with you. If you don't like an income tax, we don't have one. So, if you like conservative government with balanced budget, no deficits, you got one. So, just keep that's the old thinking. Now, whether that happens or not, I will say one of the great things that is happening, especially detrimental to the Democrats, is we're making a lot of inroads in the Hispanics, and we're making a lot of inroads in the Valley.
What do you think's driving that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things driving that. I think one of the things that's driving that is right to life. They are Catholic and they are Christian and they are right.
So social conservatism.
That's one. I think the other thing is that you've got there's a couple of things. I think the other thing is that you've got a lot more Hispanics becoming middle class, upper class, and realize taxes and realizing the government a little more. And then the third thing I think is that if you'll go down and look at all of it, they don't want the border open. In other words, I got here, we don't need any more. It's like in Austin, I came here, let's don't move any more people here, that kind of thing.
Right.
But it's the same in the Valley area. They don't, whereas, I'll give you a good example, whereas we used to have a lot of, ballot security problems. You always worry about ballot security.
Landslide Linden.
Well, they could bring people across the border, we thought, and vote, and and it's very easy to register in Texas. It's postcard registration, so it's easy. But we find that the last all these elections now, it's Hispanic against Hispanic.
Generationally,
they're fighting each other. And the other thing is that that's changing is that a lot of these elected representatives over here in the Senate and in the House. not so much in the House, but a lot in the Senate, have been there for a long, long time. And if you keep the fiefdom small, it's easy. If it breaks out big, might not get elected. Might be some new leadership coming. So there's been some confines of that. So when they start sort of, you're stealing votes, I'm stealing, then that solves the ballot security problem. But it also, there's groups that want to increase, and there's groups that say, let's keep it like it is. So that is a change coming in Hispanic things. But you've also got a lot of Hispanics now that's just coming up and wanting to run as Republicans, because Trump made a big impact down there. He was conservative, but he made an impact last time. We elected some, Hispanics to.
Oh yeah, I think it was very surprising to most political watchers and everything to see the and the swings from
and Republicans for not the first time, but are really putting an effort down there.
I guess George W. Bush put a lot of effort
he did.
into
And the
it.
associations of Republicans and others are putting money in down there and trying to help qualify candidates and help them, like we before just said, write it off.
Well, and a lot of, I say a lot, in this, and I should qualify that I'm a Georgia political guy, not a Texas political guy, but it seems like in at least the Democratic primaries, you have a case of where the incumbents may be more conservative, blue dog Democrats versus younger, more progressive Democrats. And that what it sounds like you're saying is, if those conservative Democrats are upset in their primaries, that might make them easier to pick off with a conservative Republican who is a conservative Hispanic Republican.
Well, there is, but there's some very progressives down there running too. A lot
Sure.
of them,
Well,
now we go back to Georgia.
yeah, that's a great aside about Texas. But now let's go
back to Georgia. Yes, sir.
So you get out of the Army, and Fletcher Thompson is running for Senate. So 72 looks to be a good pickup opportunity because you've got the McGovern leading the Democratic ticket. What was the campaign? What was your role, and what was the sort of the campaign strategy for how Fletcher Thompson was going to be the first statewide elected Republican?
Because he was a conservative. He was on the Arms Committee that went after, back in those days with communists or whatever. But the bottom line was, he fit the mold for South Georgia. I mean, the area I was covering.
Right.
He wasn't a liberal, so to speak, as they called it back then. We didn't call them progressive. We call them liberals. Still do. But the point was that he fit the mold better than we thought than Sam Nunn. And Sam Nunn was, you remember, had beaten Gambrell.
Right.
And
right.
Gambrell, that was the appointee, and he didn't fly well at all down there.
Right.
And we said
he was the Carter appointee.
Right, and Carter at that time, I think, was about 20% favorable.
He was
rating,
not very
22.
popular in the state of Georgia.
Not at all.
That's a lot of people forget that.
No,
he had a very tough
all.
time.
Not at all. He was very unpopular. And so, we had bumper stickers back then that said, Miss Lillian's right, Billy is smarter.
Oh.
We had all these bumper stickers.
Harsh.
That was the way it was. They just didn't like Carter. And so Fletcher fit the mold, and it was not a problem selling Fletcher Thompson in South Georgia.
Even though he was a
From
Fulton
Atlanta.
County guy.
Yeah, no, because he spoke their language.
Gotcha.
When he came down to speak, he converted people. And we had farmers and we had the rural people that liked him, along with Nixon. And so, we said, like you said, you could say Nunn's just another tied with McGovern. I mean, whatever.
Right. That effort to break Georgia Democrats from the party in Washington.
Right. That's exactly right.
Do you think that's why Democrats were so successful statewide and in big ticket races, because they were able to, in a sense, denationalize the race and run as, I'm Herman Talmadge, I'm not.
Richard Russell fought the Civil Rights Bill. Herman Talmadge was a good old Southern boy. both of those, one, they realized the power of Washington, that things got done. If you're a farmer in South Georgia, you didn't have any problem going to the ag department because of the two senators you had.
Yeah.
So they could disassociate those guys from a Lyndon Johnson, a president, or anybody else, because they had the power.
Right.
And why would I change the power? Why would I change what I'm
Why
getting?
risk it?
Yeah, I mean, what the heck? This is the most power we ever had up in Georgia. You had two very, very powerful senators. And, you know, you had some congressmen that came from that grade. I mean, the Bogins and the others that came along, they were all Herman, you know, it went up. So, but Fletcher, it was an open seat. It was a wide open deal. And Carter was trying to push his guy in, and then Nunn beats him, and then, which shows that Carter didn't have the clout. So it was an open, the political environment was just right.
Okay.
You had McGovern, you had Nixon, and you had a potential to put in a Republican senator that they didn't really consider Republican. They considered him as a, you know, he was a better good old boy somewheres in the South than Nunn was to some degree.
Interesting. How much interaction at all? Was there a Nixon campaign in the state?
Oh yeah, big time. Nixon came to Atlanta.
Richard Ray, I think, may have been the head of the Nixon campaign in '72.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Nixon had a big presence.
So how much effort was there to hitch your wagon? Sam Nunn's trying to not hitch his wagon to McGovern.
Right, we did the same. We did the type thing. We did it when Nixon came and rode down Peachtree Street and all that, and we had Fletcher and I mean, we had we tied in as much as they would allow you, but you got to understand, they didn't allow you too much. They ran their own operation.
Oh yeah, the committee to reelect the president.
I know. I did some advance, and I'm telling you, they ran a strict ship about who was seen, who couldn't be seen, and what was done and not done.
Did John Mitchell manage that campaign? Was that who the?
Maybe I was.
You probably would have dealt with a regional guy.
I did the regional guys.
Yeah.
I did, and you know we. Lou Kitchen was the campaign manager.
That's right. Yeah.
And Lou handled all that through that group.
Lou Kitchen.
Buddy was the Buddy Bishop, field director deal for Thompson. Ran an operation politically.
Okay.
And so yeah, it was.
So why do you think? Well, I think we already established why Republicans weren't able to elect many congressmen in '72, and maybe this informs the next questions, which talks about Bob Shaw's chairmanship. Bob Shaw took over after Wiley Wasden, who was only there for a period of time. Savannah banker, investor. So tell us about how you met Bob Shaw and how you got to know Bob. I guess Bob would have been chairman in '72. When did you come on as his executive director?
Well, I didn't come on, 73 maybe.
Okay.
After we lost the election.
Okay.
We were looking at 73. Shaw was talking about doing this. I can't know who all the people, maybe Lou Kitchens, maybe some others, I don't know.
Sure.
Somebody that had connections with Atlanta. I wasn't connected to Atlanta. I'm connected to the South.
Yeah, because he was the 5th congressional district.
Right, he's
Republican.
all and I think they may have talked to Shaw and said, we got a guy you ought to.
Okay.
Army veteran, all that stuff. You ought to come up here. And maybe he did a great job in South Georgia. And I said, well, whatever. But he could put organization together where we don't have any.
So this wasn't a good old boy hire. You didn't know Bob until you became executive director.
I didn't really know him that well at all. No.
So tell me about getting to know Bob and what his plan was for the party and how you were going to implement it.
We had a small office.
Yeah, sure.
Very small office.
Not a phone booth, but slightly bigger.
A little bit bigger, but not much. Small office, and he wanted to expand. He wanted to put in field people and all predicated on the fact that we could get the districts to fund it. It was like, if you want a field man in the 1st district, then the Republicans in the 1st district
are going to pay for it.
A percentage of it. We could take some of it, but better percentages. Yeah, you will fund a field guy, so to speak, to help organize in your districts. Maybe more than one district, whatever. So that was the theory behind it, and we did hire some field guys eventually. But the idea was to get the party fundraising, get the party more visible, I guess you'd say.
Sure.
And put Shaw out on the front line and everywhere we could go and do that kind of thing.
Yeah, he used to go around and debate Zell Miller when Zell was your counterpart, I guess, in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, we used to. Bob had some great ideas. The problem we all had in the party was we were just small and we didn't have the funds or the resources that the Democrats had, and it made it a lot more difficult. Mattingly expanded on that when he came in.
Right. We were talking before we started filming. We were talking about fundraising that you were involved with. What was before you got involved as executive director and sending out these direct mail fundraising? How was the party? Was it
they
just
had what
Bo
is called,
Calloway writing checks, or
to some degree, you had a. I can't remember the name of the committee. It's in the paper, but I can't remember the name. It was a Century Club or whatever. Century Club.
That's it. Yeah.
But you also had the 120 Club.
Right. The $10
a month.
Yeah.
And that was really the basis of the party. I mean, the $10. If you got enough people to give $10 a month, you could sustain an office.
Yeah, sustaining. Yeah.
Along with some Century givers, and then you do a big dinner every year or something, and a fundraiser.
Right, Lincoln Day.
Yeah,
or
Lincoln Day.
Like that.
That's exactly right. Right. Lincoln Day wasn't as popular as, but it was a Republican dinner.
Right.
And you'd have a personality come in.
Sure.
But that was the basic it, and that's why I wasn't really going anywhere. So when we put a direct mail program together and started doing, one direct followed by another direct, how that worked back then. Direct mail was very successful if you did it right, and everybody didn't understand. Well, you're only getting a 1 or 2%. Listen, if you're doing it right, you're paying for the list, and you're paying for the mail.
You're paying bulk mail.
And
rate,
then once
so
you've got your list that's solid of givers, you just keep going, So it got it off the ground and got some money going.
Was this before Richard Vigary, or is this sort of contemporaneous to Vigary's?
Vigary?
Richard Vigary. He's sort of the Vigary. Richard Vigary.
Yeah, it was sort of. I tell you what it was. It was sort of help from the National Committee.
Okay.
Because the National Committee was doing some of that under Ray. I think it was Ray Bliss was chairman back then. Yeah. Whatever they had some advisors that would come in. We would go to these. I would go to these schools, campaign schools and things, and pick up information from all these things. Give you a really insight background back there in the South. Look at this. The executive directors, we started communicating with each other. Haley Barber was executive director of Mississippi. Jay Stone was in, that's Henson Moore's guy down in Louisiana. Gay Suber was in South Carolina. Ron Rietdorf was in Tennessee. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of his name now. He ran all the conventions later on in life. He was in Alabama. So we had a connection with all these guys, and sidestep for a minute. In '73, I guess it was, when I was first there or whatever, we were going. John Conley brought all the EDs, a lot of the EDs from the South to his ranch. That's my first trip into Texas. And we spent the whole weekend in San Antonio and at the ranch. Best beef you'd ever eaten, and a whole deal with Conley and Tower and all that crowd down here to working for us, because Conley was wanting to run for president.
Oh yeah.
So he brought us all down here and entertained us, and basically I became really good friends with him over the years, especially in later years. But that was a deterrent. But at the time we started communicating. So what are you doing in Tennessee to raise? What are you doing in Mississippi to do? So I was trying to look for all the ideas from others. Steal from other ideas in these other states. What the heck are y'all doing to raise money? Y'all got the same problem I got. You ain't got a lot of Republicans either.
Right.
So what are you doing to survive?
Yeah. How do you squeeze blood from a stone? Kind of, especially when you're talking. Yeah. You go into you come in '73. And obviously the 74 cycle is probably a slow motion nightmare as an executive
Watergate.
director. Tell me about it. You know, obviously it really didn't hit the fan until July, August, but it was always looming there, especially Saturday Night Massacre straight on through. Tell me about the 74 cycle, because you had a lot of different moving parts going
Well,
on.
it's a 74 cycle. You got to remember, Nixon was very popular. Very popular
Landslide
in the
election,
South.
72, yeah.
And so Watergate did not, I don't think, hurt us as much. I mean, I almost won a congressional race, but I mean, Newt lost over in his race. But the point was, we all did pretty darn well, considering where the rest of the country went. Mm-hmm. And the South was still pro-Nixon. They were against all this Irwin and Jury and all, the whole business up there was just because they had, like anybody, if you vote for somebody, you really believe in them, you don't want to believe that they're bad.
Sure.
So,
sure.
you still supported them. So we still had support all through those times. So that wasn't as bad. We were still gaining ground, I think.
Do you think, of course, you were most involved with Quincy Collins' campaign running against Larry McDonald,
Right.
Who had beaten John Davis, John Davis, who was the
John Birch Society.
Yeah, Larry McDonald, John Birch Society. Do you think that Ronnie Thompson at
Machine
the top
Gun
of the
Ronnie
ticket hurt more than Richard Nixon and Watergate in 74?
Maybe. I wasn't involved. I mean, I know Ronnie, but we wasn't involved that much with him.
Right.
We had Ronald Reagan come in for Quincy.
Now, Quincy Collins, he was a POW, right?
8 years.
8 years.
8 years.
And John McCain was there for 5. Yeah. So I guess Quincy Collins must have been one of the first pilots to go down. And
he's the one that led the choir. He's the singer,
That's right.
Right.
So
Quincy was there a long time.
That's a long time.
It was, and so you played somewhat on that. If you'll notice, you look at the brochure. He's in
sure.
in the clothes.
That's understandable.
Played on that. You can't attack him because they couldn't attack him for being a carpetbagger because he said I've been kind of locked up. So that didn't play.
Right.
But yeah, it was. 74 was, I think, in the rest of the nation was all Watergate stuff. But in our own campaigns running in Cobb County and those smaller counties, Cedartown up in that area, you didn't. Right. I don't think I saw that. It was a campaign against each other.
Interesting. Oh, do you think it would have been easier running against sort of a John Davis character? Than
yeah.
Well,
John Davis wouldn't have had.
Quincy Collins was probably a bit more liberal or progressive than Larry McDonald was.
You'd had to be.
I don't know. I don't know how you got to the right of Larry McDonald.
No, you couldn't. You couldn't. And that was the other thing that they had. They had all this national support.
Yeah.
That Davis would not have had. No, we would have beaten. No, well, we almost beat him. So
right. Well,
even
sure.
with all the national money and whatever they have running through there, You also got to remember now that the Ethics Commission had just come in. You got to remember that. So a lot of people didn't know they didn't apply by it,
Right.
Remember in 72, there was no Ethics Commission. There was no...
suitcases full of money.
Exactly. There was no accountability.
Right.
Accountability started in 74.
Right. The Vallejo. And then Vallejo
just
standards.
Barely,
Right.
And so what happens if I don't file my report? I mean, this is new. Now, by 76, it was a different.
Yeah.
But 74 was the new stuff.
So in 74, or I guess it would have been 75, Bob Shaw gets a challenge. He has to run for re-election to be chairman, and he draws some opposition from your friend Mac Mattingly. Mm-hmm. And there's another fellow whose name, let me see if I can find his name. Yeah, he was from Atlanta or something like that, like Portho or something. I don't know, Portho. where obviously you were probably officially neutral as an executive director.
Well, yeah, it was
tell me
a
about
thin
that.
line to walk.
Yeah, tell me about that rock and a hard place you found yourself.
Well,
in.
I was employed by Bob Shaw. He was the chairman. He was my boss. So Mac Mattingly is a very close personal friend. I've known him forever, and Mac understood that. And Mac, to his graciousness, never put me on the spot. He never said, I want you to support me and, leave
Or
and
else.
come out, whatever, Yeah, no, that was never in the card. So it then enabled me to go ahead and continue what we were doing with Bob Shaw and see if Bob could get reelected.
So why do you think Mac was successful in getting elected in '75 over Bob?
I think because over the years, it's just like if you're a county chairman for 20 years, they think maybe we ought to, nothing's, you hadn't elected anybody statewide, you hadn't done this, you hadn't done that. It was just like maybe we need a change.
Okay.
I don't think, and it could have been some personal stuff against Bob that some people in Atlanta, maybe he's lost some of there or something, because you're so close to it there. But overall, I don't think so. I think the people still like Bob Shaw. I mean, he was a good man. But I just don't. I just think it was that time through Watergate, going forward, that it was time maybe for a change.
There was some conjecture from the political press in Atlanta at the time, the David Nordens and some others, that Bob was seen as too close to the Nixon administration, and that sort of tied him too closely.
I never felt that, but we were very close to the Nixon administration. There's no doubt. I went to the White House when Nixon was there, and we met with Haig, and and you had the Southern Mafia. You got to remember that.
Tell me about that.
Clark Reed from Mississippi
right.
headed up the Southern Mafia group. We were the most welcome people at the White House under Nixon and under Ford. Although Ford went out of his way to have to appease us because he had put Nelson Rockefeller in. And so that did cause some problems. But we had a Southern group that was lockstep, and so we were always welcome.
So you worked with Harry Dent, I guess.
Harry Dent, Harry, yeah, sure did, absolutely. Harry's a good man, yeah. And Ann Armstrong from here in Texas was up there. It was always had an open door for us. But yeah, Clark was always up there.
Right. So the argument would be that you're so welcome because there's the Southern strategy.
That was it.
So that define this as a Southern Republican who was close to the Nixon administration, part of the Southern Mafia. How would you define what the Southern strategy of Nixon was and how it was implemented maybe from the White House?
Well, I think it was such a drastic difference between George McGovern and Richard Nixon, and that your toenails wouldn't fall off if you voted for a Republican.
Hey, can you prove that?
Might turn green, but it won't. but it was such a great wide difference that it was a lot easier to sell conservative Democrats and that was the South. It was all conservative Democrats. They voted Democrat, but they voted a philosophy. They voted a belief. They did not vote. They wouldn't vote for George McGovern.
Right.
So Nixon had an easy sell in one respect, and we had the organization to help bring that together from all the Southern states. And in some states, we'd elected some people, so that helped too. So we had and he needed that. He didn't need the Southern yellow dog Democrats to all vote for McGovern, because that would, hold your nose and vote Democrat. No, we're going to turn that off. We're going to go the other way. So the strategy was look at the difference.
Right. So with Gerald Ford comes in, and I believe Bill Brock would have been the RNC chairman. 77. What changed? Because you mentioned Ray Bliss, and Ray Bliss was very, very much, for those unfamiliar with Republican National Committee chairs, he was very nuts and bolts. find them, count them, vote
like
them,
Brock.
kind of. What did Bill Brock bring to the party in terms of sort of modernization efforts?
He changed the whole concept to some degree. Bill Brock, being from Tennessee, obviously accepted in the South.
Right.
But Bill Brock, first of all, he went to England, out of all places, and studied the media and how they had done media over there to some degree. And we started looking at media. You know, remember the Reagan, fast forward, the Reagan, It's a New Day in America,
Yeah.
you know, on the Hill. That all came about through the Brock's early media stuff, saying there was change coming. But what Bill Brock did is he created a new division in the committee called local elections. And he said, like Bob Shaw had said at one time, and Mac Mattingly, we need to elect from the bottom up, not from the top down. So he put together a whole field operation, money backed it, everything, and he went into like Detroit. You know, we went to the convention in Detroit for a specific reason. So he spread out.
Right.
And he started bringing...
Which is very much what still happens to this day.
Well, yeah. And so it was, we elected some mayors in Michigan. We elected some council people. He had a whole group working on that. While I was on the other side, I was working on the statewide, so they were working on the locals. So it was a tie-in together. And they had money. They could come in and say, Mayor, we're going to pay your qualifying fee, and we're going to give you some polling, and we're going to help you get elected mayor. Right. And then maybe next time you'll run for the state house, and then maybe next time you'll run for governor. You know, that was the kind of concept behind it. And we did that. I mean, he actually did that. And then he put in some new type media to support that. You know, the television stuff went in. I'm trying to remember some of the names now of the greats that went on to become greats with them, but it was Brock just had a whole different type concept.
Mm-hmm. And is that what Mac tried to implement?
Yeah.
So he
some of the same type stuff. Yeah. Plus the National Committee was pushing that, so he was, you know,
right.
And he wanted to kind of go that way.
Right, because Mac would have been a member of the National Committee.
Right.
So he
he was. Yeah, there's three members. Yeah. You kind of want to, you know, go that way. I mean.
Right.
Sidestep again.
Yeah.
We had people like, you know, Roger Ailes and others that were doing all the media. Roger Ailes did all of my media here in Texas for me. He did all of Graham's stuff.
Right.
And that stuff. I did go out for Graham to California and spend a year and a half on a campaign out there that shouldn't have, you know, but it's another story. And I had Ailes out there with me too, but then he said, I'm going to leave and go. So he did. He went and made some big money.
So in '76, Ford is the unelected incumbent president.
Mm-hmm.
Ronald Reagan decides he's going to run, and you'd mentioned that the Ford White House tried to stay close to southern states.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Bo Calloway was his first campaign manager. Mm-hmm. What was it like having Bo Calloway running the presidential election campaign? Well, of course, only for a bit.
You got to understand, at that time, most of the National Committee people were committed. In fact, I'll say all of the National Committee, mainly all of them, were committed to Ford.
Sure.
But the Reagan movement was underway. And in the state of Georgia, we had a big contingency of Reagan people.
Right.
And, of course, Mac and Nora Allen and Nola Murrah, I think, were all, you know, we were the Ford. I mean, it was, we basically Ford, but I had to stay open for both sides because you got to play the whole party. But they didn't, they were National Committee folks. So, and if you remember, across the South, people like John Tower, for example, wasn't even allowed on the floor of the convention. And it was tough. Mac was not even chairman of the Georgia delegation.
Right. Right, because there was a primary, a presidential preference primary in Georgia.
That's right. And plus,
and it wasn't even close.
No, and plus Reagan had most of all the delegates were Georgia was Reagan, except maybe a few National Committee people. Nora Allen and those, they'd vote for. You know. So it was a a very contentious convention, to say the least, and it divided a lot in the state. I mean, it was
Sure.
you know it was a battle.
Do you think? Tell me about the '76 convention. You were telling me a little bit about it.
It was in Kemper Arena, which is a very small arena. It was extremely hot. Air conditioning didn't work that well half the time. They placed all of the Reagan delegates as far away from the convention center as they possibly could. We were in Belton, Missouri.
Oh my gosh!
And the only place, and if you remember,
that's not close. For
they would
anybody who
call
doesn't-
meetings, the Ford people would call meetings early. They would change the schedule. So basically, we were always on the road back to the convention. You ate what you could find, a hot dog or wherever you could get there. The only place that was air conditioned and had a cold beer was, there's one little private club you had to in the deal, and you had to get some acceptance to get in there. And they didn't serve Coors. They served Coors across the river, but Coors didn't come over, you know, and everybody wanted Coors.
It's a Smokey
it was
and the Bandit.
Hamm's.
Smokey and
it was
the Bandit,
Hamm's
yeah.
beer, I'll never forget. But we always would go back to Belton late at night. You remember, everything went to 1 and 2 in the morning. They would
So
try
everything
to,
in Belton
they would
was
try
closed.
there wasn't anything. It wasn't even a Waffle House that was open. You know, it was horrible. And it was in a little motel out there. We were in the middle of, and they did that to all of the Reagan delegates, all the way around Missouri, put us all way the hell out. So they thought they could get into the convention, come adjourn, and we wouldn't be there, and they could vote whatever they wanted to vote in type. So we basically lived at the convention center because it was contiguous. And
basically, the hope is enough people, half dozen or so, are just going to say, "Forget it, I'm
right,
going
and
home."
and now you got to remember, on top of all that, you had rules committees, you had all the committee meetings. Which
there
were
were credentials committee.
Yeah,
there
credentials,
were,
all that, and the credentials was
that was
challenged all over the place.
because it was very close. The delegate count was it was up in the air.
If you remember, Clark Reed switched Mississippi, and Billy Munger walked out on that one, and that was the end of Clark's deal. That was almost fist fights.
Right. Well,
And go fast forward a little bit more, in '80, I'm on the floor, and
this is in Detroit in '80, right?
Yes, and I get the word that Reagan has picked Bush to be vice president. Well, that was like pouring gasoline on a fire. I mean, it was like everything we could do to get half the delegations not to walk out because they were so adamantly opposed to Bush because they'd fought him all through the primaries.
Right.
And Jesse Helms had declared he and North Carolina would leave. Mississippi said they would leave. So they was just starting, just like the secession. It was just coming down like in a wave of fire. And if you will remember, this is the first time in history, Reagan had to come to the floor.
Yeah.
And that's the reason he came to the floor.
Right.
If he had not come to the floor, that would have been just a disaster in that convention.
Right. There were some folks who were very close to Bush in the Georgia Republican Party. Paul Coverdell especially was very, very, very close. Fred Cooper.
Right.
The
I worked
chair.
that committee. I was two weeks in Detroit. 2.5 weeks I lived in Detroit. Yeah, I was on the rules committee.
Do you think, because in this to take it back to '76, when the Reagan campaign said, I'm going to pick Senator Schweikert to be my vice president, well, he got huge blowback from that because these delegations that you're talking about were saying, well, we're not going through all this trouble to have Senator Schweikert a heartbeat away from the presidency.
Right.
Why do you think, going back to '80, why do you think he went with Bush instead of maybe a safer option?
Believe it or not,
Or a
it
base
was a
option.
very, very close deal to get Ford.
Uh-huh.
That was very,
Didn't
very,
CBS
very
spill the
close.
beans or something?
Yeah, that was up.
A co-presidency. That was the term that got
Right.
thrown around.
Yeah, Brock, of course, that was our convention, so Brock was, but yeah, that was a close deal, and that's why it was a hard pill to swallow too for a lot of it, for not me, but I mean for a lot of people it was hard, and especially in the South. But to get, although he was more acceptable than Bush,
Right.
to a lot of folks, and that would have been setting in history to say the least. But that didn't happen.
Right.
And then they picked Bush, and that didn't go over well either. So, but in '76, in that convention, between the fact that there was real, almost fisticuffs between delegations, and the Ford people and the Reagan people. I mean, it was all out war, and they tried to circumvent everything for the against the Reagan folks and all, because they were running the convention.
Right.
Mary Louise Smith, I think, was chairman then. So, so they were all, everything was inclined for the president and not for Reagan.
Sure.
As a result, just fast forward, Reagan and Knopfsinger and a group decided after that convention, when they walked out at 2:30 in the morning, this will never happen again, because we are going to take over the National Committee. And what they did was they methodically, state by state, moved in. At that time, they called the Christians. They started moving. Here you are, the county chairman in Georgia. Been the county chairman 20 years. I get my little phone booth group together for the convention. They elect me as chairman again. All of a sudden, I go to my precinct committee meeting, and there's 200 people that I don't even know as chairman. And they nominate somebody that I don't know. And the next thing you know, I'm not county chairman anymore.
Sounds like what happened with Pat Robertson's
That's
campaign
exactly what
in
they
88.
sided with Reagan, and Reagan, this is what the whole thing started happening. And so then all of a sudden, they took over the committee by virtue of those delegates then went to the state convention, and they elected a state chairman, national committee man, national committee woman. And bingo, it changed.
Right.
Over a 3-year period, it totally changed. And, Dick Richards came in as the chairman deal and all that stuff. But all that took a methodical move by Reagan to make sure that in 1980, when he went to the convention, he controlled the convention.
Now Georgia was a holdout in that regard with Rodney Cook, because Mack knew he wanted to run for Senate,
Right.
and Rodney Cook, who came from a more liberal Republican tradition.
Right.
There was a group, a sort of informal group, long-range planning committee, and we've talked about some of the individuals already who were members or belonged to that group, like Bobby Heydrich and Rodney Cook, Nolan Murrah, Bill Amos, Don Layfield, Bob Irvin, John Linder, folks who were, and Paul Coverdell, obviously. What did that sort of long-range planning committee hope to do? Because that was an informal group that was not necessarily tied in with the state party. What were they trying to do, and what was their vision for changing the party or growing the party, I guess?
You named off a lot of people, but it was really about 5.
Okay, who was the core group?
We met down at St. Simon's Island, a private meeting deal with Mac Mattingly. Mac was chairman. Coverdale, Gingrich. I think Bob Irvin may have been there. I can't remember now, and maybe Linder. I'm not real sure. There wasn't a big group. And the ultimate of what we decided to do was how, in the next 6 years, it was a 6-year plan, if I remember correctly. Yes, 74 to 6 years from now. Here's what we want to have happened. First thing we want to do is get Gingrich elected. He's already lost once or twice, and the goal was to get Gingrich, to break that mold,
right.
Get that done. The second was to get Mac Mattingly elected to the U.S. Senate, or if something happened, somebody. And how do we do that? And Coverdale said, how do we expand in the House and the Senate? That was that kind of thing.
The General Assembly.
But the big thrust was, let's get these two. But in 1980, where will we be type thing? And we laid that plan out. And basically the gist of the plan was for Gingrich to do everything he's done, but he's got to do some more. And how do we do that and lay out the plan and work with the congressional committee, get into polling, get all the stuff, and don't give up and go back, and keep forcing it. Because we thought we'd either beat him or he'd retire in that district.
Which he did.
Yeah. Well, and that was part of the strategy too early on. I can go back for that, is that if you run enough people against them, if they're old and been there a long time, they'll retire. And then you get another shot. And you may not get it, but an open seat's better.
I think the
than an
political
incumbent.
science research would bear that out.
Yeah. So that was kind of the way we went. But the other thing was to take Mattingly and take him to every county in Georgia, move him around the state as the state party chairman. That was his title. And elevate that title. In other words, go and talk and let people know who Mac Mattingly is. Get him exposed, because nobody knows. He's a Republican chairman. But if you go down and speak to the ladies club in Colquitt County, and you speak in Albany, and then you come back next year and do it again, or 6 months, but you target it. Where's the votes? Where's the counties? More time in Atlanta. All the things you need to do. Get some more time at WSB. Do whatever you got to do.
Right.
Exposure. And that was the big part of that plan, was for Mattingly, was just get exposure. Just get out and get all over the state and keep pushing. Get Gingrich. We had a plan for that. We had a plan for working all that. And then Coverdale, he had a plan for, maybe picking out certain little districts that he was the insider for the legislature type thing.
Right.
So you could target and pick out where we are. And just don't spend any more money on all this other stuff. Let's focus in on what we can do and can't do.
Right. So instead
And
of
it's a
casting a
target.
wide net, you're targeting.
Targeting that. Pick up 2 seats in the House. Pick up a seat in the Senate.
Doable goals.
Doable. Things that you can actually do.
Okay.
And then if we see an opportunity, then we can, this doesn't run on straight, we can switch tracks. We can go this way.
Right.
But you look for opportunities and to kind of lay all that ground out. And then I would go, like I did at the University of Georgia, and made that speech that got me in all kind of trouble. But
Well, tell me about this speech that got you in all
that's
kinds
the
of
one
trouble.
I gave Mattingly, because it was in the Journal Constitution magazine, where Talmadge was saying, "Who in the hell's Richard McBride?" I had gone to the political science department at the University of Georgia
Okay.
to talk from the Republican standpoint.
Sure.
And I mentioned in the fact that, because I was supposed to help this plan, that perpetuating the 1980, Herman Talmadge has a good chance of being beat. Mm-hmm. And they all, they had no way to beat Talmadge. But I said, things changing. Things are changing. I said, plus he has a drinking, everybody knows he has a drinking problem. Well, nobody had ever said Talmadge has a drinking problem. That had never been. He covered that up totally. So all of a sudden it's in the press. So I didn't know the press was there. So I'm on the car on the way back to Atlanta, and I hear Richard McBride, Republican Party today, says Talmadge has a drinking problem. Holy mackerel. So I called Mac. I said, I'm detouring down to St. Simon's. I'm not going to the office today. Might not go to the office next week. So yeah, it was kind of the start.
And that's how Richard McBride learned a valuable lesson.
I had learned anybody in here learn the press? So anyway, that started kind of the deal. And then years later, I gave Mac all this stuff. I thought it'd be funny. It's in the Constitution of the magazine deal. And
That is actually sitting on Robert's desk right now in
well,
the
it's-
Russell Library.
It's all in there.
Yep.
And the other thing was my good friend Gene Meffin,
whose papers are at the
Reader's-
Russell Library.
Reader's Digest. He sent me down an article. He quoted the article. The guy used to be with the Macon paper, Shelby.
Selby McCash.
Yeah, Shelby McCash wrote an article about that same thing years later, that I had said this, 4 years. And Meffin sent me an article and said, "Prophet before his time." That I said Talmadge would be beaten 80 and that he had a problem. So
Right.
But anyway, that's digressing to go back.
Yeah.
In '76, like I say, it was a tumultuous convention.
Right.
And it was just hard on everybody because we were so far out, and meals were hard to get. And
All apologies to the good people in Chamber of Commerce of Belton, Missouri.
Belton, Missouri. We wasn't the only ones. There were some other delegations across the road, up the road in Motel 6 or somewhere. I don't know. It was, you
Right.
know, they were spreading the economy around up there.
Right.
Anybody been downtown in Kansas City yet?
The drum
Yeah,
room.
all of the delegations for Ford were all downtown.
Oh yeah, probably the big Hilton, the historic Hilton.
Oh,
downtown
there's a
stuff.
big classic hotel there. I went by it one time. They're all there. Everybody was there.
This is an aside for me. That was my first history conference I ever attended, and I got to stay at the Hilton downtown Kansas City, and it was very very nice, very historical.
Yeah, it's a short bus ride to the Kemper.
A lot shorter than Belton, Missouri. So were you still with the party in the lead up to '78? I can't remember that. I'm getting my.
No, I went to the National Committee in
Okay.
'77.
So tell me about that transitioning from state focus, very very deep focus into Georgia state with 159 counties. Now you've got to broaden your perspective a bit.
Well, the good news was that as a result of having the ED coalition, so to speak, we'd all changed. We'd invite all of them to Atlanta, and they would invite us to. I went to Yazoo City and saw Haley Barber, and we all became friends.
Right.
So it was a lot easier for me to go to Mississippi because I knew people I could call upon. And they could introduce me to people and tell me what the lay of the land was. And I could go see Clark Reed and Billy Munger and those people. I could go to Florida and see, Paula Hawkins and those types, early on. And then go down to Miami and meet with the Cuban delegations. And it was easy in one respect because I had knowledge of the states and I had people that I knew there. Texas was a little different because I knew Connolly because we'd been out here, but I didn't have a lot of contact. But Charlie Black, who ran the committee and was my boss, Charlie had lots of contacts through Reagan because he was Reagan's big guy, at one time.
He was a Southern director in '80.
Big political guy. So Charlie, he would make calls ahead and say, you're going down to Texas, this is who I want you to meet with. So come down here and see Henry Angelo, see the right people, and then branch out from there. So the road was paved, so it wasn't as hard moving out of Georgia. Moving to Texas was one thing, but moving out of Georgia to all these other states was a great promotion for me. I got to meet the gubernatorial candidates, the senatorial candidates, and get a much more knowledgeable state. You have to do a lot of studying on the state because they're all different, just like every state's totally.
Sure.
This is 5 states here in itself, and Florida's, it's down the center is cattle, and over here is the Midwest, Michigan, Ohio. They all go to the Gulf side. New York, Jersey all come to the east side. It's a whole different. And you learn how to. Went down to meet with the mayor of Fort Lauderdale was Clay Shaw, and Clay Shaw became a congressman forever. So we went down and laid his campaign man out and got him into the race. And for example, that's an example in Florida. And we brought down committee people. I could always have resources in the committee to bring folks. So it worked, and you have to go, spend time with each of the national committee members,
right?
Keep them happy.
So you mentioned Charlie Black.
Yeah.
Was Charlie Black hired on by
Bill Brock?
Bill Brock. Okay. So because I think Charlie Black's, you already mentioned, mostly associated with Ronald Reagan and Black Manafort and Stone and
right.
that. So Bill Brock actually brought in. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And he was the boss.
Yeah.
He was the whole political operation.
Yes.
So Charlie ran that operation.
So how'd you wind up out here in Austin, Texas? You said there was.
Charlie Black and Bill Brock called me into the office and said, you're coming on board and all this. You've got all these states. We would like for you, because there's great opportunities that we feel like there's great opportunities abounding in Texas, and that we would like for you to consider moving to Texas from Atlanta. I'd just gotten married, so I said, well, I need to go home and talk to my wife about this. So we did, and they said, you can go out there and you can look for anywhere you want to live. There's no particular place you know. I said, well, having traveled Texas, I like Austin, but she may want to go to Corpus, or she may want to go to Dallas, or she may want to go to Houston. Bush Sr., George Bush Sr., had offered, if we come, I said, I'd like to try to find my wife a job, and they said, we can do that. And Conley also offered. And so we came out and we flew around and looked at places, and she liked Austin, I liked Austin, so we said, we'll just move here. And then she got a job with the guy that was selling us a house, believe it or not, for writing. She's a journalism type person.
Okay.
You know, so they wanted to put some brochures and pamphlets, whatever, so she got into all that stuff. But anyway, long story short, we then moved to Austin, Texas. Mm-hmm. They kept me with all the other states that I had, though, and it finally became apparent that I would have to spend a week in Florida, you know, just to get a few days in Florida.
Sure.
And then you go spend a few days in Mississippi or Alabama, and then I'd be in Texas, and there'd be so much happening between the times that you'd been in Texas as there. Things change in politics, 24 hours of politics.
Yeah.
So finally you realized that, you know, you got me stretched. So I'm never home.
Right.
So anyway, I'll give up Florida. Florida and Texas, just two big states.
That's a lot. That's a big ask.
So give up Florida, and they said, okay, take New Mexico and Arizona, and Nevada, whatever. And I said, okay, fine. So that's what I did. I just moved west.
So you got some frequent flyer miles.
I was a million miler in 3 airlines, I think.
Yeah, that doesn't. Just some quick math in my head.
I would be known to have a breakfast in New Mexico with the chairmans and that type, a lunch in Arizona, and a dinner in Vegas or somewhere. You know, sometimes it was like that, because you had to see all three members and see what to keep the updates and what's going and write your reports. And then if there was nothing really happening in some areas, you didn't spend a lot of time with them. But, you go and show your face every now and then. But if the real campaigns and stuff were somewhere else, you'd be down trying to help with those people and see what was happening.
So did you follow along when Mac was running for Senate in
yeah.
80? Tell me about.
In fact, I'll tell you a story.
Yeah.
I was on an Indian reservation in Arizona. We were trying like heck to save Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater is in serious trouble in Arizona. And the irony of all that is Ronald Reagan got his start with Barry Goldwater at the convention in San Francisco.
Time for
and
choosing.
Here is Ronald Reagan sweeping the country, and Barry Goldwater's going down, it looks like. That was the irony. So they had put a judge or somebody in to try to open up the reservations to vote them on the day after the election. So they were going to start voting and reopening and voting, and so we were putting in lawyers and we were putting in everything we could. And so I was out on this deal when Mattingly calls and says, I was looking at the other things, and I said, well, it looks like Mac's going to win in Georgia. Well, he wins. He's there. I think we were with Oscar Person or some of the others. Anyway, he calls. He said, hey, Bubba. I said, what is it? We won. I said, yeah, I saw. It's great. Congratulations. He said, what do we do now? I said, you govern. It's a hard thing for Republicans to do. We're great at taking the mountain. We're not too good at governing.
Do you think that's still true?
To some degree, yeah. To some degree. Not as much. But it used to be that if we're like Marines, if you wanted to take that mountain, we took it. But once we got there, you got to govern. The problem was, if you remember in the early years we're talking about, government was the problem. Anti-government. So all of a sudden you're part of the government. So you didn't, want to govern it. So that, and the other problem was, for the bureaucrats underneath were all Democrats, and still are to a great degree. because it's hard to get Republicans to come into the government. They don't want to come into government. I mean, it's different now to some degree, but back then it wasn't. It was, why the heck would I go and work for, well, you just elected somebody. He needs help. He needs to have people in there with him. We need to put somebody, a governor, we need to put Republicans in all these agencies and stuff. Nobody wants to be in the agencies. I mean, that was a problem, being governed. So we had a problem governing. We didn't have a problem getting elected in some cases, but we had a problem governing.
So when did you finally step away from the RNC to do your own deal?
1983.
So 83. And that's when you got tied in with Congressman Graham.
Well, actually,
I guess you would have known him.
Actually, no. I decided to go out on my own.
Okay.
I had a congressional candidate up here in Round Rock. I had another congressional out in West Texas. I started picking up clients of my own. And then Atwater called, and Black and Atwater called and said, you got to come up here and meet us again. And then from there on, then I said, okay, and I was going to be a consultant,
Okay.
That's what I was doing, consulting. And so I'll consult with Graham and, advise and counsel type. And then Graham came back and said, no, I want you to be a manager. So that was another trip up there to talk with them again. So after that, then I took over the job as manager. We started running the campaign after he had gotten elected to the switching over from the deal.
Now, was there any chance that you were ever going to go to Washington with him?
No, I kept telling him that. I mean, there were these people go and say no. I don't particularly like Washington. I hate the weather up there. The people, it's like, I was a director at the National Committee at one time, back in when Dick Richards was in. He made me a director on this new, well, I don't know what the hell we called it, but it was a new project. I had to tell you about that. But anyway, and I had to spend time, I had to live over in West. No, man, I don't want to live up here. This is horrible. I did, but I didn't. And then when Phil ran for president, I was in Washington for a year and a half with him.
Was that 96?
Yeah, so I went up there as political director, and I didn't like Washington.
You must have had a
pretty, a glass house.
You must have had a pretty close relationship with Senator Graham to move up to Washington to do that.
I did. He's a great man. He as he always says, he's taught me a lot. He's very smart. He's extremely smart.
Well, he does have a PhD from the University of Georgia.
Well, but I mean, politically, he is smart. He can put it in good English where people understands it, but he knows campaigns. He knows polling. He is really, really smart.
In your time, and obviously I'm not telling you to name names or anything like that, but did you find that to be very rare among candidates that actually knew how the campaign worked?
Of all of them, Phil Graham's the smartest. Absolutely. Smartest candidate I ever worked for. He was brilliant. He was always 2 jumps ahead. He was just really good.
So, what does that mean what does it mean for you and your job when a candidate knows what you're thinking or is sort of from the same place as an operator in terms of knowing the nuts and bolts of a campaign, as opposed to maybe a novice candidate who you've got to maybe handhold?
Well, it just means you pay more attention to the candidate, because a lot of times Phil Graham was right and maybe we were wrong. I don't know, but normally it comes to a little more discussion, a lot more discussion and arguments to some degree. Well, no, I don't think
Here's why we can't do X, Y, and Z.
Well, the example, a Graham example was Graham wanted to reach out to everybody. He wanted to especially go, since he was a former Democrat, to go to the Democrat areas and things like that. Well, in a Republican primary, you need to go to Republican primary areas where he'd want to go to, like, to Vernon, Texas. And there are more people in one precinct in Dallas that vote the whole deal in Vernon, Texas. So he, smart as he is, he said, I'll come to a deal. I'll give you X number of visits on a day, and you give me 2 or 3 visits on my day. And I said, well, that's a lot of visits. You'll wear out. He never wore out. He never wore out. He has got great stamina. I mean, he just really unbelievable.
So does he still live here in Texas, or
Yeah,
does he live in?
He's got a ranch down on the other side of San Antonio.
Oh,
Yeah.
down in Connolly country down.
Well, no, Conley's on the other side. He's over in Floresville. He's down towards Uvalde. He's down. I'm trying to think of the name now, but he's southwest of San Antonio. Connolly goes southeast of San Antonio to Floresville.
Right.
Yeah, totally different. Yeah.
So when you decided to get out of campaigning and running campaign, I think in terms of all the interviews I've done, you probably stuck with running campaigns longer than most of the people.
Everybody said that, and I probably stuck away too long. Yes, you're right.
It's a very tiring.
It's a young man's game, and there's a point you come to where you say, I just. It's sort of like lobbying and anything else. There comes a point in life where it's just not the fun that it used to be.
Sure.
It's not as enjoyable, and when it's not as enjoyable, you ought to find something else.
So what was it like making the switch from consulting and managing campaigns to lobbying on public policy issues or issues like that?
Believe it or not, it's a lot. There's a lot of comparisons that are equal. You have to deal with staff, you have to deal with members, you have to deal with egos. Well, guess what? In campaigns, you got to deal with staff, members, and egos.
Right.
So it's in that respect, it's a lot the same. It's just that this time you're working for a client, and whatever that client's issue is becomes your issue.
Right.
It's not where you have to study it and do all the, you do on the bills, and you got to watch for the bills and stuff. But it's a total, as far as the personality and as far as the interchanging, probably a lot alike. As far as the other stuff, as far as issues, you're not into trying to sway campaign. You're only trying to sway one member or two members or three members. You're not trying to sway a multitude of people.
So were you lobbying primarily up the road at the Capitol here?
Right up here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess that was, at least you got to stick closer to home.
Absolutely. That was the other great. Well, now, let me tell you, it's the best gig in the world. You know why?
Why is that?
We're only in session every other year.
That's right. I forgot about it. In Georgia, it's 40 days every spring.
No, it's every other year, 140 days, and you get a 18-month vacation, basically paid.
Well, that's great work if you can get it.
It is good work if you can get it. It's the best gig you ever had, but you still got to deal in that 140 days is a rough go. I mean, there's some days 18, 20 hours are easy because a lot of times they'll have hearings 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and then you've got another hearing at 7 or 8 in the next morning. So, I mean, on the bills. So it can get real tight. And it's like anything else. If your homework's due on Tuesday, that's when they do the work on Monday. So they make it compressed at the end. It's pretty easy starting in the beginning, but it's still a go all the time because you've got all these members. And then every cycle is different because you've got so many new members come in or old members leave and new chairman. And
how big is the General Assembly here in Texas?
31 senators.
Oh, my gosh. That's
150 reps.
Yeah, in Georgia it's what 58 senators and 180 reps.
We pay them $6,000 a year.
You're not going to get rich.
Excuse me, a month. We pay them $7,200. Not $6,000. $7,200 is what we pay. But anyway, it's a very low fee.
Yeah.
Everybody has to go back and go to work.
I'm just thinking of how big those senatorial districts must be in this state. That's a big geographical area.
Their senatorial districts is a million or so. It's about the same as it's
about a
about the
congressional
same as a congressional district.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're huge.
So looking at 2020 and sort of the current politics that's going on, were you surprised that someone like Donald Trump was able to come in and win the nomination and really sort of remake or rebrand the Republican Party?
No, I think it was ripe for picking.
Why do you think that? Because coming out of the Bush years and George W. Bush years, I should say.
Well, the political environment changes all the time. I mean, we all know that. But when you have either a Bush, Clinton, people are, don't we have anybody else? I mean, it's sort of like these dynasties that get there. I'm not knocking the dynasties. I love the Bushes, but it's still, it's ripe for picking.
Right.
And we in this country have been starting to divide more and more as we go along. We've gotten either farther to the right or farther to the left. The middle ground is the hardest one to come back to.
Right.
It used to be, to get elected president, most of this country is right of center. Majority of the country is right of center, or it usually has been. If you're too far to the left, then you get nominated, it's hard to come back to that middle right. If you're too far to the right, it's not as hard to come back to it, but it's still tougher. So if you're more moderate Democrat or somewhat moderate Republican, it was usually easier to get elected.
Right.
Yeah. But when you start dividing it up, where that moderate period is either dissipated this way or dissipated this way, it then becomes an open game. And whether through the other thing that's changed in our society is the internet. Our means of communication used to be television. Prior to that, it was radio and newspapers. Newspapers are about gone. Radio is just there. And billboards, I don't know why. and then you've got
Billboards, I don't know why. I love
Well,
that.
I used to tell my candidates, and this is way back when I was campaigning, I said, if you want a billboard, you need to buy about 3 of them. And here's what you need to buy. You buy one as close to your opponent's house as possible. So when he gets up every day, he sees you. You buy one as close to your mother's house as you can, because she'll be proud to know you're doing something. And then you buy one close to you so that you'll know there's billboards up. Other than that, there's no need for billboards. Makes everybody happy.
That's good.
So,
that's good free advice for anybody watching this.
That's billboards. Anyway, television is still there. You've got to have television.
Right.
But any campaign today that doesn't have a social media person on their team is in trouble, I think.
Yeah.
You've got to have somebody that gets into all the blogs and the stuff. I'm an old guy. I'm not into all that stuff. But I'm smart enough to realize you got to be into it to win. Mm-hmm. And all the campaigns that I've seen today, and I visit some every now and then, but I don't have anything to do with them, that's the big thing, social media. Mm-hmm. Some campaigns run a total social media campaign to some degree. And where is the best place to put disinformation and misinformation? It used to be we attack, put out mailers. Mailers is too expensive now.
Yeah.
People don't read them. They throw them away most likely. I mean, there's still some places you can target it. But the point
Very
is...
local races,
But
maybe.
the point is, the whole concept of campaigns has changed.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result of that, so has the electorate. And as a result of that, yes, a Don Trump can come in and get elected. Because of dissatisfaction, misinformation, people turned off, people got their one issue and they're going to ride it till it dies. Mm-hmm. So as a result of our changed environment and our changed politically, the way we elect people nowadays, it's a different world.
Now, were you surprised that in this changed environment, the Democrats, instead of nominating maybe the hot new thing, chose instead Joe Biden, who had been United States Senator since 1973, been President Obama's vice president for 8 years. They decided to nominate him by a very wide margin after a very slow start in 2020. And that was the Democratic nominee for president was Joe Biden instead of a Beto O'Rourke, for example.
No, I actually thought Biden would win when he first got in because he's establishment. The Democrats have gone back, picked up a playbook from the Republicans they've gone back to where Republicans always used to nominate the end guy.
Right.
Bob
somebody
Dole.
whose turn it was.
Bob Dole, it was his turn. Did he win? No.
No.
But they went back and picked that series, plus control inside was all there,
Right.
the mechanism. And so I wasn't surprised at all that he did it. The question now, did they steal the election? Didn't they steal the election? This is going to go on forever. The bottom line is I've seen elections stolen in the past, in history, but it's sour grapes if you come back in afterwards, and eventually with the role of the media or whatever, you'll never win that battle. I've never seen anybody win the battle on a stolen election.
What, looking backward is not
It's sour. Look, it's over with. Let's move on. Let's get to something else. You didn't cut it. For
Right.
whatever reason, you didn't either have the best ballot security to stop the stealing, or you just didn't. It didn't happen. So it's over.
right.
Move on.
So you talked about the
But it's a good incentive to say if it was stolen, it won't be this next time. See,
there's the campaign consultant.
It's a
always
it's
be
a
working.
guy to come in and say you got an issue here. You can pound on a little bit.
You talked about the Rio Grande Valley sort of trending red. Well, if you looked at in Georgia, you look at places like Cobb County, Gwinnett County, Houston County, Columbia County, those suburban areas, which were always so incredibly important to Republican Party. Mac Mattingly elected with 80% of the vote in Cobb County in 1980. These counties are now voting 60+% for Democrats here in Texas. Williamson County, Fort Bend, these counties that were always suburban Republican counties are trending blue. The Dallas Metroplex, Tarrant County is voting, Democratic, at least at the presidential level. Maybe Denton, Collin County is headed that way. Why do you think that is? And
Well, I think it's possibly a couple of things. I think one, it's new people.
sure,
Okay,
it's a growing state.
That's a given. Second, it's who are the candidates?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at the statewide, they're not doing bad in those areas. They're still hanging in there.
Right.
We're all still electing people. I mean, they get closer, but it's
Sure.
still hanging in there. And then it's an influx of either people that were there that either got complacent, just assumes it's always going to happen, or it's the process of better candidates on the other side and better campaigns,
Right.
of which they before may have said, we're not going to campaign in there because that always goes Republican. Now they say, I think we'll give it a shot.
Right.
So,
So
see, in Texas, when I came out here, we put a plan together years ago. There were 6 congressmen, old, long-time congressmen.
like the Wright Patmans of the world, kind of old.
I can name them all the way around. And we went in, and we put in some young bucks and some money, and we made them come home from Washington and run for something they hadn't done in years. And they didn't like it. They retired the next year, all 6 of them. Now, that was the good news. The bad news, we only elected 1 Republican out of that 6, but at least we had an open seat.
Well, do you think, going back to your point about contesting elections, for a while, you mentioned earlier that Republicans have run the state since George W. Bush and Rick Perry came in up and down the row offices and things like that. Do you think that the growth in Democratic performance is the fact that a Beto O'Rourke does get millions of dollars to just compete, and that a Democratic presidential campaign actually did invest in Texas,
It's
as opposed to just writing
it's
it
2 things.
off?
Texas is being so important presidential-wise, but being very important because of how big we are. Robert O'Rourke, we call him Robert because he never used Beto in his life until he ran for office, and Beto means Robert. So bottom line, I think that you got all the new people moving in and how that's going to play we still hadn't seen all the elections yet. So that's still there. But if it's any indication in the last elections, it was not a factor. But because Texas is so important, it's worthwhile to invest in trying to run somebody to try to get elected, to try to improve the standing, and versus just sitting back and let them have it.
Right.
Plus, because we are so conservative, we are anti-East, anti all of the push buttons that the Democrat Party has, and we're the one shining example down here in Texas, that they're going to pull whatever they can and try to change whatever they can. I mean, just because it feels like we ought to go get them. I think that's part of the thing. I really do. But again, the importance of being Texas and presidential. And if you make some gains each time, then hell, why give up now? Just keep going.
Well, I mean, obviously, the answer is yes, they can. But say the Democrats were to flip Texas. Can a Republican presidential candidate win without Texas?
Sure, I think you probably could. I mean, Goldwater carried Georgia, and it was a solid Democrat state.
That's true.
I mean, there's examples of that all over the
Sure.
place, but it will depend on the campaign and the candidate. I
Right.
always say that because you gotta stipulate who moves people. People vote for people they think they know or feel comfortable with. That's the bottom line in campaigns.
Or they feel they know.
That's right. I mean, that's what I say. They feel
Right.
they know them.
Okay.
Although majority of the people 2% probably never meet a 3% make a candidate.
Right.
I mean, it's a very small amount to meet. But I think that in Texas, I will not say that we're going to continue to keep this going forever, because I don't think you will. But it's a good possibility that we got still a run. Everybody had predicted by 2022, because of the giant Hispanic population, etc., that we would definitely be a Democrat state by then. But Hispanics, it's a different deal. It's a different type deal.
No constituency is monolithic, as they say.
Well, they also don't understand that they say they don't vote, and a lot of them don't.
No, true.
And they don't vote because they don't want to go near a government building. They don't want anything with the government, so to speak. So there's that stamina to overcome. That's changing, and I'm sure it will continue to change. And they're still trying to register. I mean, Obama's team came in here last time and spent a fortune on voter get out. I don't know who put all that together, but somebody probably retired after that deal, and it didn't do anything. So either they put the money in their pockets or they went. I don't know what they did, but we did have a candidate here in Texas one time that spent like $80 million, Sanchez, and he gave everybody his walkers and all. He gave them all tablets and everything, and got his clock clean. So, but and we, we'll get 38% of Hispanic vote, 32%. So there's still a block out there.
Oh, sure.
And I don't know. I can't predict that. Nobody can predict that. But I think as long as we can keep our candidates and keep them straight and keep them going, we're going to be all right, I think. It worries me a little bit sometimes when you get too far to the right or too far, out there, to how far we can come back. But in this state, it's a pretty conservative state.
Are you concerned that the party is getting too far to the right, or
I think there's probably some. Eventually, will go too far, and they may not win. But I don't know, because our state keeps going that way. So who knows? Who knows?
Right.
I mean, you can say, why are they going to the right? Well, apparently they got polls and they got consultants that are saying, hey, you got to be over here.
Fair enough.
So that's where you need to be. And some of the people say, well, I don't know if I like that, but they'll still vote for you. Don't worry about it.
Well, Richard, this has been an entertaining and educational talk. Is there anything else you'd like to record for posterity?
As I pass on in this world.
If you're watching this.
Well, the way I want to go is I want to be at the University of Georgia, sitting on my seats, and we're beating the North Avenue Trade School 99-0, and we go for 2. And as we cross the line, I'll jump up and just keep going.
It'll be a heck of an event for the folks sitting next to you, but you won't have to worry about them. All right.
No, I think I appreciate you guys coming out.
Oh,
man.
absolutely.
I hope I was helpful. I don't
Absolutely,
know.
absolutely.
It was a different time, different world that we're in now.
Yeah, nothing lasts forever. So
Well, that's true. That's true. But y'all in the new stuff.
that's right. That's right.
I don't know if I can run a campaign today or not.
Well, only one way to find out, Richard.
No.
Okay. Well, with that, thank you again on behalf of the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. Go Dogs.
Thank you. Go Dogs.